It's really an honor for me to be here. I've been looking forward to this all year, and who wouldn't? I'm truly happy to be here with you at the Aspen Ideas Festival. I want to thank Walter, and I want to thank the staff for doing this beautiful thing, and to all of you for giving me a little bit of your time today. I live in Washington, D.C., mostly so you don't have to. Washington has a lot of partisan dysfunction. That's not news to any of you, but I want to sum it up with a story of two Republican congressmen who have just left votes at the Capitol. They're walking down the street. They're old friends. What are you going to do this weekend, et cetera? And they're not really looking where they're going. And they notice that they've walked right in front of the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. Okay, so this is the heart of darkness to these guys, right? And they look, and there's a sign in the front window, and the big sign that says, "Become a Democrat today, earn $1,000. So one says to the other, I mean, look at that, that's weird. You don't think that they're that desperate, right? I mean, they're not paying people to join the Democratic Party. He says, I don't know. He says, I tell you what, go in there and pretend you want to join. Okay? He says, okay, I'll do it. So his friend walks in, and the other congressman is waiting outside. He waits for 5 minutes, and 10 minutes, and 15 minutes go by. So he goes and sits on a park bench across the street, and an hour and a half goes by. And finally, his friend walks out, and he goes running up to him, and he says, so what happened? And he says, well, I joined. And he says, what do you mean you joined? He says, yeah, they had some very compelling arguments about economics and foreign policy and social policy. So I'm a Democrat now, a liberal Democrat. He says, huh, did they give you the $1,000? And his new liberal Democratic friend looks at him with pity and says, is that all you people care about? So believe it or not, I don't have a partisan point. The question is for me, for us, in this beautiful place of incredible abundance, what do we care about? Is abundance truly what we care about the most? That's what I want to talk about here today. I want to talk to you about the economic system and how it affects my purpose in life and yours, and how it can enhance our purpose in life more, as well as the purpose in life we try to give to people who are not here with us today. Now, my search for what my purpose in life, like yours, takes a winding path. I didn't start off as an economist in the think tank business. When I was 6 years old, I didn't say, Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be the president of a right-wing think tank. Turns out nobody says that. All I wanted was to be a French horn player. My whole life, I wanted to be a French horn player. I know it sounds strange, but I started when I was 8 years old, and I was really good at it, and I practiced hours and hours and hours a day. And my teacher and my mother, who was very ambitious about my music career, they said, you know how you're going to know if you've made it? You're going to play Carnegie Hall. You're going to play Carnegie Hall. And I had this image in my mind growing up that if I was a really great French horn player and I was going to go pro, I'd play Carnegie Hall. Well, time went on, and when I was 19, I dropped out of college. Dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And I became a professional French horn player. I started playing chamber music. I went on the road playing chamber music, and I always had this goal in my head, this purpose. If I make it, I'm going to play Carnegie Hall. Well, I made it. When I was 24 years old, I got my Carnegie Hall debut playing chamber music. And I remember walking up to Carnegie Hall. I had my instrument, and I was wearing my tails. And my picture was on Carnegie Hall. I said, man, this is it. This is my purpose. I went in, and I warmed up, and I was getting ready to play this incredible concert. And the concert started, and it was like this. It was this, like a huge crowd. And I got up because I was going to introduce the audience to the music I was about to play in my own voice. So I went walking to the front of the stage with my instrument with complete confidence, and I didn't look where I was walking, and I fell off the front of the stage into the audience. And it wrecked the whole concert. I ruined my own Carnegie Hall debut. And I realized in that moment that I had bad karma because I had a stupid purpose. that God thought I shouldn't have this as a purpose in my life, or somebody thought I shouldn't have this purpose in my life. So I went in search of a new purpose, right? And I got my horn fixed. And I stayed in the music business. And over the next few years, I wound up finding myself in the Barcelona Symphony. I played in the Barcelona Orchestra for a bunch of years. And when I was there, I learned more about music than I ever had before. And I can tell you that I had a favorite composer. And this is really how I found my purpose. My favorite composer is a composer that most of you know. It's Johann Sebastian Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach is arguably the greatest composer who ever lived. He lived from 1685 to 1750. Unbelievably productive. He published more than 1,000 works, chamber works, cantatas, orchestral works, choral works. He also, by the way, had 20 children. That's productive. And Bach, near the end of his life, he was about 64 years old. He was approached by a minor biographer, and this material is preserved strangely and blessedly by posterity. This minor biographer asked him a simple question. The question was, Herr Bach, why do you write music? Why do you? Now, think about it. All of us do something, and it's something kind of good and productive and fancy. Nobody ever asks you why you do it, right? Why do you make chocolate? Guy makes chocolate. How do you do it? How much do you do it? What goes into it, but why do you do it? Bach was asked why he did it. He didn't give a 30-minute exegesis on the nature of classical music. Here's what he said. The aim and final end of all music is nothing less than the glorification of God and the enjoyment of man. That was his answer. Now, that had a huge impact on me when I was 28 years old. I said, could I say that? Somebody came to me and said, Brooks, why are you a French horn player? Would I say, for the glory of God and the good of mankind? Not so much. So I went in search of the way that I could answer that, and I actually went back to college. And I started studying anything that I could find that would give me this sort of life purpose. And believe it or not, I decided to become an economist on the basis of that. Sounds crazy, I know. Leave classical music, go into economics. But here's the reason why. Because I was looking for this purpose of how I could serve my fellow man, and I had come across the answer to a question that had always bothered me. And the answer to the question, or the question itself was, why do people stop being poor? Why do people stop being poor? See, I had learned this incredible thing, this incredible fact, that from the time I was a child until I was in my late 20s, and even beyond, the percentage of the world's population living in abject poverty on $1 a day or less had declined by 80%. Most of you don't know that because that's treated like a state secret. We are solving poverty around the world as we speak. And I know there's too much poverty, and you probably join me in feeling morally commanded to wipe out every single one of those cases. But when I saw this, it's in contrast to what everybody thinks. 70% of Americans believe that people are hungrier than they were in 1970. There's an 80% reduction in world hunger from when I was a kid. So I asked myself, why? I studied economics to find the answer. 2 billion people have been pulled out of poverty since we were children. Why? Well, I found some things that weren't the answer. The United Nations is not the answer. US foreign aid, good, but not the answer. The World Bank, the IMF, great institutions, or bad, depending on your point of view, but they're not the solution. Here's what did it. 5 things did it. 5 things pulled 2 billion people out of poverty and made me an economist and brought me here to stand in front of you today. Globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship. See, it was the American free enterprise system that pulled 2 billion people out of poverty since I was a kid and made me an activist in this movement. It's incredible. Abundance. And it made me understand this central fact. Abundance is the greatest moral challenge of our time, but not for us. Not for us. Abundance is not something we need to fight for people in this room. It's something we need to fight for people who are not in this room because they can't be in this room. That's what brought me to the American Enterprise Institute, where I'm currently serving as president. Incredible thing. And it changed my life. I finally said, I'm going to be like Bach. Sort of. But there's a problem. But there's a problem. See, that's not the end of the story. I had the great honor of speaking at the Aspen Ideas Festival last year, and I talked about happiness and the secret of happiness. And I brought up the secret to abundance, these 5 things. I talked about this last year, but that's kind of where the story stopped. But that isn't really where the story stops. I do a lot of speaking on college campuses. In my job, which is weird that I get to do this for a living. It beats working, to be quite honest with you. But I speak on college campuses all the time. And I talk about abundance, and I talk about poverty and all that. But always when I'm done speaking, a bunch of kids come up to me, and they say, I got it. I got it. You know, capitalism is really good for lifting people out of poverty. I got it. But what about us? Does this hurt our souls? What is this doing to our culture? Is there an environment, an ecosystem of materialism that's making it hard for us to thrive? Millennials, more and more, are thinking about the big spiritual questions that can't be solved by economic abundance. Now, there's a study that points out the internal paradox of searching for abundance when people are trying to find their souls. It's a great study. It's a study that I encountered a couple of years ago, and it really made me think. It's from the University of Rochester. 2 researchers in 2004 started out to look at the goals of graduating seniors. They had a 5-year project ending in 2009 when they published this study. What did they do? They took 147 graduating seniors in 2004, and they interviewed them, and they said, what are your goals for the next 5 years? Imagine yourself being truly happy, flourishing, satisfied in the year 2009 when you're 27 years old. Tell me about your life, your future life. And what did they find? They did a content analysis on the 147 answers, and they found that there are 2 kinds of goals. Now, nobody used the same words, but there were 2 kinds of goals. And they were academics, so they had to put fancy words on it so they could get tenure. And I'll tell you what they were. Exogenous goals and endogenous goals. Okay. First of all were the exogenous goals. I want to be rich and famous. 50% of the kids talked about money. They talked about fame. They talked about success. They talked about getting a lot of respect in their fields. And they said, if I'm happy in 5 years, I'm going to be experiencing a lot of worldly success. Okay? The other half had endogenous goals, which were goals about relationships, about love, about people who are near you. If I'm successful in 5 years, I'm going to have a good relationship with my friends and with my parents, and maybe I'm going to know God. They talked about those things that are endogenous to our lives. So 50-50. Mostly women had relationship goals, and mostly men had worldly success goals, but not exclusively. And it really was 50-50. Almost, it was like 75 and 72 people in each one of these groups. Okay? Now, here's where it gets interesting. They followed up 5 years later, because they wanted to see how these kids were doing. And they re-interviewed all of them. And they found good news and bad news. Here's the good news. Everybody hit their goals. Virtually everybody was successful in what they set out that they wanted to do. The kids who said, I want to be rich and famous, they were on their way to the corner office. They were making money. They were recognized for their achievements. They were getting promotions. They were working super long hours, but they were getting what they wanted. Those who had endogenous goals, if they said, I want to be married, they were ordinarily either married or engaged. If they said, I want to be close to my parents and friends, they were close to their parents and friends. They wanted to have a good religious relationship, they had that too. Everybody hit their goals. Here's the bad news. Wrong goals, not such a good life. What do they find? The endogenous goals, the relationship goals, kids, they were happy. They had high levels of life satisfaction. Exogenous goals, money and fame, they had anxiety, stomach aches, headaches, loss of energy, and shame. Sounds great. Remember when your mother said, careful what you wish for? Social science says she was right. Careful what you wish for. Now, this is a big deal to me because first thing I said when I came out today is I talked to you about why abundance matters morally. Why abundance is such a big deal. Why capitalism is good for lifting people up. But I have the study that shows it seems to be kind of at odds with that. How do we square this? I was thinking about this after I read this study. I was thinking, what do I tell the kids? What do I tell my kids? I have a house full of teenagers. Pity me. And I got to tell them something. I have to be honest about it. I don't want to be partisan. I don't want to be an ideologue. I want to tell them the right thing. So I was discussing this on my way to India. I go to India a lot. AEI has a wonderful and thriving India practice. Fantastic. It's my favorite place to go. AEI has a big collaboration with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Every year we do a summit with the Dalai Lama. It's so fun. We go, last year he came to Washington, D.C. Next year we're going to his monastery in Dharamsala with a film crew, and we're going to meditate with his monks, and then we're going to discuss the morality of capitalism. It's the best. Weird, I know, right? It's the new right, my friends. It's the new right. This is the way, this is the direction the whole thing's going. That's right. So I was going to India. I was going with one of my colleagues who's an India scholar, and I was telling him about this conundrum that I had in my head. Look, I know that abundance is important for lifting up the world, but what does it do to our souls? What does it do to us? What about the endogenous goals? And he said, oh, I got a guy you got to talk to. Really? Yeah. We're going to be there. We're going to be in Delhi. He said he's the administrator monk of a temple called the Swami Narayan Akshardham Temple in Delhi. If you haven't been there, it's a wonder of the modern world. 10 years, full-time, 7,000 stone-cutting artisans to build this place. You've never seen anything like it. It's breathtaking. The administrator monk, his name is Swami Gyan Muni. He says, you got to talk to Swami Gyan Muni. If Yelp reviewed Swamis, he'd have 5 stars. I said, okay. Yeah, that's right. Everybody under 40 thought that was funny. So, okay. So I went to see Swami Gyan Muni to ask him about this conundrum, because apparently he'd been thinking about it. He had some special knowledge that my friend said. He said, trust me, he's going to be great on this. And I went to see him. It was a hot day in May. It was a bright, sunny day, and I was in this courtyard of this gorgeous temple, and I saw Swami Gyan Muni coming toward me, an Indian guy, obviously, shaved head, orange flowing robes. And as he was coming toward me, I'll tell you what was going through my head. I have a relatively nuanced set of moral questions to discuss with the Swami. Is he going to get it? Is he going to understand? Are we going to be able to communicate? Well, he cleared that up. He got within 3 yards of me. It's like you're here, and he says, he sees me, he recognizes me, and he says, how you doing? And I said, where are you from? And he said, Texas. So this is really surreal at this point. I've gone to India to discuss capitalism with a Swami who turns out he's from Texas, right? And Swami Gyan Muni told me his story. And it was basically, here's how it went. Swami Gyan Muni was brought up in Houston. His parents were petroleum engineers. They immigrated to Texas, and that's where he was born. It was an incredibly education-oriented family. He graduated as the valedictorian of his high school at age 16. He went on a full scholarship to the University of Texas and graduated in 3 years. Went to get his MBA, finished it in 1 year. So he's 20 at this point, or 21 at this point, and he goes to work for McKinsey. See, his parents told him that version of what my mother told me, which is you got to get to Carnegie Hall. Said, you got to make a ton of dough. You have to make lots of money. This is what's going to make us proud, and he did. He had pure exogenous goals. Now, this is really freaking me out because, you know, the Swami, who's from Texas, it turns out he's a capitalist. But I don't know what's happened because now he's a Swami, so there's a lot that he's going to have to explain to me. And here's what he said, that 5 years went by. On his 26th birthday, he woke up and he said, is this it? Is this kind of all there is? He said, you know, I work day and night. I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have any relationships. I'm making a lot of money. I could be partner by the time I'm 32, but for what? So he went on a spiritual vision quest. He started to pray about it every day. He prayed about it every day for 6 months. And finally he decided he was going to renounce everything. He sold everything he had. He gave his money to the poor. He went to Delhi. He joined a Hindu seminary, and 6 years later, he emerged a monk, a renunciant monk. And I said, you don't own anything? And he says, no, no, no. I own everything I need. I have 2 robes, prayer beads, and a bowl for my food. Now, I'm very nervous at this point of the conversation because my next question is, Swami, what do you think of capitalism? And I know he's going to say, it's a crock. It's a sham. It sucks out your soul. Join me. And I was not in a position to join him. So I got up my courage and I asked him. I said, Swami, is capitalism good? And he said, no, it's great. It is the only force that has ever pulled people out of poverty in the history of my country, by which he meant India. And I said, now I'm arguing the other side. I said, yeah, but look at you. You owe nothing. You renounced it all. Isn't it bad for your soul? He says, you don't understand. Money's not bad for your soul. What you have to look out for is attachment to money. Now, it sounded really Eastern to me for about 5 seconds until the light bulb went on. I was raised in a Christian home. Some of you were too. The most misunderstood and misquoted verse in the Christian Bible comes from St. Paul's first letter to Timothy. We always remember it as money is the root of all evil. It's not what St. Paul said. He said, the love of money is the root of all evil. And that's what we learn in every religious tradition. If you prefer the Hebrew Bible, in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10, he who loves money never has enough of it. This too is meaningless. Every religious tradition teaches it's not abundance that is the problem. It's the love of abundance. It's the attachment to abundance. Now, attachment is a big concept with the Swami. It's a big concept in Sanskrit-based languages, as a matter of fact. There's a word in Sanskrit for attachment. It's upadana. Upadana. And it's a wonderful concept. Upadana means the sticky craving for inadequate things. Think about it. All those inadequate things out there that stick to you and you can't get them off of you, that's attachment. You've seen it in your life. You've experienced it in your life. That's upadana. So I asked Swami, what do I tell my kids? You know, I'm a big capitalist. I'm president of the American Enterprise Institute. You're killing me. What do I tell people about how to be for abundance, but against attachment? This is the journey we went on together. We stayed in contact. I wrote about this in the New York Times, in the column I write periodically for the New York Times. He read it, by the way, because he said 100 people sent him the column, and he called me on my cell phone. It turns out Swami's got my cell phone number, and he says, donations are pouring in. I said, that's great. I'm glad to hear that, Swami. But he basically says, how do you understand life's goal? Here is the sine qua non of satisfaction. Abundance without attachment. Remember this. Well, actually, the first thing I asked him, by the way, is, why don't I know that? Why didn't I remember that? And he says, because there's a conspiracy. There's a conspiracy against your knowledge. I said, what do you mean? He said, turn on the TV. What do they tell you? Buy this car, you'll be happy. They tell you that attachment is good. Listen to Hollywood. Listen to Madison Avenue. Listen to all of the people that are trying to shape culture. They're trying to get you to be attached to something. See, here's the worldly formula for happiness. Love things, use people. That's the worldly formula. And it's exactly toxic and wrong. You want to know the right formula? Turn the bad one upside down. Take the inverse. Make it virtuous. Love people, use things. Abundance without attachment. How? How do you do that? Here are the two ideas to get us started. Here's how I put it into practice in my life. Here's how I talk about it with the kids on college campuses and with my own children, and I submit it to you, these two ideas, with appropriate humility. Abundance without attachment. Practice number 1. Get into your mind the thing to which you're really attached. The sticky craving for the inadequate thing, the upadana, okay? Got that thing in your head? Give it away. Charity is the physical act of detachment, and it's in your hands. For years, I did research when I was a professor at Syracuse in economics. My main area of academic research was on philanthropy. That's what I did. I mean, it's such an interesting phenomenon. People give without apparently getting a product. It's just warm glow. Why? I wanted to know how they gave, what the incentives were, et cetera, et cetera. And I was writing a book. It was a book that talked about charitable differences between religious people and people of different politics, et cetera. But I found a weird thing over the process of writing this book. I found, according to my data, big data sets, 40,000 Americans over a long period of time. I found that when people give their money away, in subsequent years, they get richer. You give your money away, and you're richer later. And I thought, that's wrong. I mean, I didn't get my PhD as an economist learning that the best investment strategy is giving all your stuff away. That's not practical. That's not right. And so I had a big problem on my hands. My data told me one thing, and my theory told me something else. So I did what college professors always do in that situation. I threw away my data. right? I said, okay, I'm sticking with my theory. But I couldn't get it out of my head. I couldn't get that idea out of my head. There was something about it. There was some music behind that I couldn't quite reject. So I was talking about it with a colleague, a psychologist who does work in charitable giving. Same area as me. And I said, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you this, but I got this really weird thing that keeps showing up in my data. It looks like when people give money away, in the next year and in subsequent years, they get richer causally because of the charitable gift, according to my data analysis. And my friend said, no kidding. We've known that for 30 years in psychology. I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, we don't look at it in terms of how much money people make after they give. We look in terms of something that's much more important. I said, what's that? He said, happiness. When people give their money away, they get happier. And he gave me a whole bunch of brain explanations about lowered stress and higher self-efficacy and the projection of being a leader that people have when they give their money and their time and their energy and their affection away. When they give the things to which they would become attached, naturally, they become happier. And there's also literature that shows when people get happier, they become more effective. And, you know, it's not that interesting, but it turns out they make more money. The light bulb went off. Again, ding, I should have known it. And as soon as I saw that and understood the mechanism, I started seeing it happening every place. You know, when you're learning a foreign language and you learn a new word and suddenly you hear it every place. That's what was going on in these studies. People who give their money and time away get richer. They get happier. They get healthier. My favorite studies show that when you give money away, you get better looking. It's true. It's true. Here's how it works. In 2012, two psychologists from the University of Liverpool did a great study where they brought people into the laboratory, human subjects, and they brought in men, but the only catch was you have to bring in your wife or girlfriend, okay? Wife or girlfriend, heterosexual couples, they come in, and here's the deal. You have to take your wife or girlfriend. It's the whole, they give them a pocket full of change, step one. Step two, you have to walk from one building to another, and when you get there, it's going to be a 10-minute interview and you're done, okay? Fine, easy. So one by one, they would get their pocket full of change, and they would walk with their wives or girlfriends. Some of these guys had met the girl 2 weeks ago, and some had been married for 50 years, right? They walk with their wife or girlfriend. Turns out there's an alleyway between the buildings. They get to the alleyway, and a homeless guy comes wandering out, and he panhandles the husband. Hey, buddy, you got some change? Now, the husband had to make a choice. Am I going to give him some change, or am I going to ignore him? Now, he made his choice. They went walking along. They got to the other building and had the interview. First, they asked the husband, did you give the homeless guy some money and how much? And then they asked the wife, how handsome do you find him right now? They were looking at the correlation between how much you give and how sexy she finds you. And what do they find? The more you give the homeless guy, the more she likes you. Huh. News you can use, guys. That's useful research. But the main point is this. That's the first lesson of detachment. It's in your hands. You can physically detach yourself from the thing to which you have a sticky craving. Figure out the object of your attachment and give it away. Number two, lesson number two. Stop thinking about the price of things. Start thinking about the value of experiences with people you love. Really pursue the endogenous goals in life. Now, you know this already, but I'm going to remind you of something that you might have forgotten. I'm going to give you an example from my own life. I've been married for 24 years. And 23 years ago, my wife and I were planning out what to do for our first anniversary. Okay? We had no money. The checking account had tumbleweeds going through it. It was just empty, practically. We had just enough money in the checking account to do one of two things. We could either go to the beach to celebrate our anniversary for 3 days, or we could buy a couch, and we didn't have a couch. So we were having a big argument, like a really bitter, angry argument about how to celebrate our anniversary. I was all about the couch, because I'm a thrifty American. My wife, who's from Barcelona, is all about the beach, right? She doesn't care if there's a couch. She wants to go to the beach for 3 days for sure. So we're going back and forth. Couch, beach, couch, beach. And finally we compromised and went to the beach. And we looked back on it 20 years later, and we realized something in our own lives that psychologists call the paradox of things. The paradox of things is that we think physical, material things are permanent and experiences are temporary. The truth is the opposite. The physical things go away. We could have bought the couch and it would have been out on the curb and, you know, at the dump or on Craigslist or something. I wouldn't even remember the color of the couch. But I can tell you every hour of that vacation. Why? Because the truth of the matter is that physical things go away, they're evanescent. But experiences live on in the ether of your imagination, in your heart, within the love that you have for others forever. If you want things that last forever, invest in the endogenous experiences with the people that you love. That's how you do it. Now, there are a million examples of this, but I'm going to give you one from the business world. Some of you are in business. I'm going to tell you about the most successful credit card campaign in the history of the credit card industry. It's from MasterCard. It's a corny, cloying, annoying ad, but you've all seen it, and the reason it's been on the air for 25 years is because it's the most successful campaign ever. And it goes something like this. There are a million incarnations, okay? You've seen it again and again and again. I'm going to recall one for you. You've all seen it. It's for example, there's no dialogue, just a voiceover. And there's a guy getting into a car with a kid. And the voiceover says, beach ball, $3. Gas for the car, $36. 2 nights in a hotel, $275. The weekend alone at the beach with my son, it's just an ad. But there's something about it. It has truth. Let me tell you how this finally came home. How this finally came home once and for all. I told you I've got 3 kids. My kids are 12, 15, and 17. My 15-year-old, his name is Carlos. And Carlos is a piece of work. I mean, he's got a scheme going in every situation, and it never favors me, let me tell you, all right? And Carlos, when he was 9, 6 years ago, he comes to me and he says, Dad, it's October, November, Dad, I've been thinking about Christmas. And immediately I'm on the defensive, right? Because I know he's playing some angle here. So I'm trying to, kill time and, change the subject and say, it's good to have Christmas in your heart all year round, Carlos, or something, something, change the subject, right? He says, no, Dad, you don't understand. I don't want anything this year. I just want this year to go away hunting and fishing alone with you. And I thought to myself, that costs 19 times more than a bike, right? But I didn't say that, right? I didn't say that, right? Like, Dad of the year, right? And I said, yeah, let's do that. And so we did, and we've done it every year since. From Christmas to New Year's, Carlos and I go away. He doesn't get anything else for Christmas. He doesn't want anything else for Christmas. This last year, on Christmas Day, we went to South Florida. There's a little town south of Lake Okeechobee called Clewiston, and we hunted wild boar. And then we went light tackle fishing off Marco Island, and we caught a lot of fish. Why do I tell you the details? Because they're here permanently, and they are for Carlos. And I could buy him a bike or a scooter, and it would all be gone. It would all be broken. It would all be forgotten. But we'll never forget these trips, ever. He says, Dad, when you're older, thank you, I'm going to take you for Christmas. This is the secret to permanent things. This is the secret to non-attachment. This is the secret to endogenous things that give us true happiness. And this is the second practice. Don't forget this. And so where are we? Where are we before we turn it over to you and your thoughts? Number 1, abundance matters. The reason I'm in this movement is because what I learned from Bach. Can I offer up in a sanctified way everything that I do for the good of my fellow brothers and sisters? If I work for capitalism in this world, and I'm conscious about it, and I'm inclusive about it, and I'm moral about it, the answer is yes. So the challenge for me and for you, in my view, and I offer this to you with really appropriate humility, is to be a warrior for that. This is not partisan. This is not Republicans versus Democrats. This is to remember that the free enterprise system is America's gift to the world. And if we use it responsibly and share it with others, we can lift up the next 2 billion people out of poverty. And we have to get this beyond the partisan debates of the day and learn how to use it responsibly and be warriors for it and not stand up for any of the arguments who say that it's overrated and say that it's not right. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, yeah, but who's the abundance for? It's for the poor. For us, we have abundance, and we have to make sure that our morals are in order through detachment from material things so that we can show morally to others what the secret of happiness is who come after us, and we can be happy people ourselves because we have a responsibility to be joyful. We are here in this beautiful place with this unbelievable level of abundance. We have a responsibility to be satisfied with our lives and show other people what abundance can do as well, but we can only do it with non-attachment. This is a new kind of thinking. This is not a political agenda. This is a kind of consciousness that I ask you to join me in a social movement for abundance without attachment. I have a privilege because I'm the president of AEI. I get to talk to all the people who are running for president. This is the idea that we have to share so that we can pass on the secrets, the purpose, the ideas of true happiness to ourselves, to people who don't know it, to the strivers, for the people who are Americans and people who are not Americans yet, but only so in their hearts, to the next generation, and to people no matter where they sit on the political spectrum. Abundance without attachment is my secret, and I offer it to you. And for what you're doing, for coming here today, for participating in this beautiful venue, in the Ideas Festival, I say thank you, and God bless you. Thank you. And we have time. How much time do we have? We have 15 minutes, so I'd love to hear what's on your mind, what keeps you up at night. We've got one right here, so think up your questions. We have mics, and I'd ask you to stand and say your name and put your protest statement in the form of a question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Pamela Pereski. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That was hysterical, and and I'm sure Carlos is really happy with that story as opposed to the one about him being a biter.
You've read my book.
So I've read the book. His son Carlos was a biter when he was a child.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, where are the Republicans like you that we can vote for?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Pamela. That's a pretty much when did you stop beating your wife question, you realize. Look, there's been it's been very tough in American politics. We're in a period of, as an historical matter, if you're a political scientist, what you might call a period of competing pessimisms. We have a political process and a political rhetoric that's largely dominated by the loudest voices that come from the competing 15% across the political spectrum. One of the biggest disappointments that we have, in my view, is that we had a promise of unity and optimism, but the last 7 years have been largely of division and pessimism. And if you're on the political left, you blame one side. If you're on the political right, you blame the other. But the point of the matter is we all agree there's division and pessimism. So what do we got to do? We have to create a social movement of moral elevation. We have to talk about the fact that we have a responsibility as a country to look realistically at what's going on in this country at the meta level. You know what the realistic truth is? God bless this country. None of us would turn in our passports to go to another country, and we know it's true, and it doesn't matter what your nationality is. Why do we complain so much about the greatest country in the history of the world? We have an opportunity to come together aspirationally for the first time with a broad moral consensus for greater consciousness for us and greater abundance for the poor. You know who the candidates are going to come to in this election, Pamela, and all of you. They're going to come to you in this audience. They're going to ask you for your support and your vote and your check. And if you can say to them, you're not getting any of that, if you're pessimistic and divisive, none of it. But if you're unifying and you're optimistic, and we can establish a moral consensus, then we can handle as a country a competition of ideas. Then Republicans can compete on one set of things and Democrats can compete on the other, and we're not going to pretend it's a holy war when it's really just a policy conversation. That's what we have to do. It's up to us.
Hi, I'm Nancy Zirkin, and I'm from Washington. I'm here to help you.
It's a good line. That's a good line. That's right. I can tell you
Wondering,
the great Saint Ronald Reagan was a big influence on her, I can tell.
all of these things that you have talked about are very inspiring. I'd like to hear how you would put meat on these bones if you were presidential candidate X.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And by the way, I'm not. And it turns out I'm the only Republican not running this time. So how do you put meat on the bones of this? You start by remembering your purpose. And our purpose is working for our fellow man, particularly those with less power than us. That's our purpose. Number two, how do you make that real? With a moral consensus around our obligation to fight for people who have less than we do, which is to say people who are not here, especially those who are poor. How do you do it? You do it with a strategy. And the strategy starts with, number one, values. I talked last year about faith, family, community, and work as the secrets to success for virtually everybody in here. Faith is a transcendental notion of what's good, religious or not. Family. Families where we take care of each other and we have traditional family life within the bounds of what we understand that to be. Community, which is friends, and work as a sanctified pursuit, as a cultural thing, not just as a way to make money. Those are the values that we never share with the poor. We have to have a strategy where we talk to political candidates and say, have you discussed your secret to success with the poor, or are you treating them like liabilities to manage? You treat your kids like assets to develop. You treat the poor like liabilities to manage. The way that you bring those together is by sharing values. That's number one. Number two is help. Help for people. What I suggest to the presidential candidates on the Republican side, it turns out I'm not on Hillary Clinton's speed dial, but the Republican candidates come through AEI all the time. And what do we say about the strategy to help poor people very specifically? Three things. This should be the strategy. Number one, declare peace on the social safety net provided by government for the poor right now. Why? Because the greatest achievement of the free enterprise system is our ability to take care of our brothers and sisters in need, even if we don't know them. No society in history has ever been able to do that, and it is because of capitalism that we're able to do it. Declare peace on the safety net. Two, only for people who are poor. What's bankrupting Greece today, Greece is going to default on its IMF debt on Tuesday and probably end up leaving the Eurozone, but that's not the real story of Greece. The real story of Greece is a 25% increase in suicides by the poor, the increase in homelessness by a factor of 3 and hunger by a factor of 2. Why is that? Because of austerity. Why is that? Because of insolvency. And that insolvency has come about, why? Because the safety net was not limited to the poor. It had 60% of the population of Greece on the dole. That's what happens when it's not limited to the poor. If you join me in believing the least of these, our brothers and sisters, need our care and help, you must be somewhat fiscally conservative, is what I'm suggesting. Three, the safety net always requires work, because work is an inherently dignifying thing. When you ask Americans, do you believe that people who get welfare should work for their welfare? And you ask only Democrats, you know what the percentage saying yes is? 92%. 92% of Democrats believe that welfare should come with work. Why? Because it's not a punishment, it's a blessing. Work is the secret to a dignified life. Work is the secret to building ourselves up. Now, we need policies that make work pay. I'll talk about that here in a second. But those are the 3 tips to fixing the safety net. Number 3, hope. We need an agenda of hope. And that comes from education reform, where we actually help kids instead of grown-ups, unlike what we're typically doing today. We need entrepreneurship that is not only for rich people, but also includes the poor. And we need a radical agenda of job creation and work. And we know how to do all 3 of those things. That's what we talk about with politicians. Values, help, and hope. And hope comes from education and entrepreneurship and work. If we do those things and we have specific policies, which we do, we can actually turn this whole situation around and truly live our purpose in politics, bring more joy to people and hope for the first time in decades. All right. All right. Where's the mic going next? Do you see actually? Right here. Yes, sir.
Davian Coleman. You talked about purpose in capitalism, and what do you think currently is missing in that sort of model of what you laid out? Because it can be argued that a lot of the poverty that capitalism has helped raise, it has also caused before that. So sort of giving back once you've sort of cleaning up your own mess in capitalism, what's missing from the capitalist model now that can sort of not create that cycle?
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. So question is, if capitalism created poverty, now do we have to have capitalism clean it up? This starts with a misconception. Capitalism doesn't create poverty. People create poverty. People not being brothers with each other create poverty. You want to see a poverty of spirit and opportunity? Go to the former Soviet Union. Go to socialist countries where we have equality at very low levels and people don't have any hope. The problem is not capitalism. The problem is we don't have a moral basis for why we're practicing capitalism. The truth is, if we don't have our own theory of moral sentiments, we won't have our own wealth of nations that works for everybody. This is the problem. Now, why did I use those words? Under advisement, Adam Smith, the founder of modern capitalist thinking, he wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. Important year for the United States, but also for Scotland when it was written. That was not his most important book. His most important book was written 17 years earlier in 1759. It was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And he showed that unless your morals are in order, unless you have a sense of your place in the community, unless you are your brother's keeper, capitalism won't help you. You can't substitute capitalism for morals. Morals come before markets. Now, markets are great, because if your morals are in order, there's nothing like markets as an accelerant to spread this out. The problem is that we have today is people forget that. We have materialism. We have social democracy. We short-circuit markets, and we ignore the poor. And then we blame capitalism. It's not capitalism's fault. The problem is in our hearts, and that's where we have to start. And if we do that, then capitalism will be the greatest friend that the poor have ever seen. Got one more. Right here, yes, sir.
Hi, Alan Papernick. I happened to be in your audience last evening, and you're speaking today to me much like many people, I think, in this country. That is, you're a fiscal conservative, and yet you sound somewhat progressive from a social perspective. You spoke last night, the main issue for Republicans this year is going to be poverty, and you've interviewed many of these presidential candidates. I mean, it just didn't ring true to me that that's what the Republicans are going to be in favor of. Can you highlight which of those candidates you think really understand that issue?
Sure, absolutely. Now I can't be too specific on the virtues of specific candidates. Why? Because I run a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and I cherish my tax-exempt status. So I have to be careful in what I say here. But what I will tell you is in talking to these candidates, what they say, what Republican candidates say in private, is consistent with what Democratic candidates say in private, which is that they're shocked, they're saddened by what's happening in this country and that people are being left behind. They're angry with the Obama administration, and this is true for Democrats as well as Republicans because so many people have been left behind. The stock market, which has been torched up by 125% in inflation-adjusted terms, has produced wealth. 81% has gone to the top 10% of the income distribution. Meanwhile, under this president, food stamp recipiency has gone from 32 million to 48 million Americans. There's something wrong with that, and people are outraged by it. The problem is we don't have a good vernacular, neither on the right nor the left, about how to talk about this. What we need to do is to set Republicans and Democrats free to do what they know is written on their own hearts. We have a tendency to say, look, they're not talking about the poor, their ideas are no good, so therefore they don't care about poor people. But that isn't, I think that's not right. I think that we all care about poor people, and that's why we need to establish the moral consensus of taking care of our brothers and sisters, and then a real policy competition of how to get it done. I don't want Democrats and Republicans to agree on how to help poor people. I don't want that kind of consensus. When there's consensus on policy in Washington, the consensus is to take more of your money. That's the only consensus they ever come to in policy. But moral consensus is entirely different. And what we have effectively is a suboptimal equilibrium in politics in Washington today, where you have one party that talks a big game about compassion, but does things that actually lead people to dependency and poverty and manages them like liabilities. and you have another party that doesn't even talk about poverty. So one side is hurting poor people, and the other side is ignoring poor people, and that's actually what's being left behind. We can actually fix that by saying, you must talk about these people. And when we do that, then voters and they themselves, are more likely to see that this is central to what I feel is right for this country. Will I succeed in doing this? Pray for me. Who's next? Obviously, we've got a session coming up that you need to get to. Let's say we got one right here in the back, and then we will be done. This will be our last question.
Todd Martin. How about economics and money teaching in high school?
Economics and money teaching in high school. I would love to see more people understand basic economics. But what I really want the most is for people to understand the moral basis behind an economic system, and that's what we're missing the most. You know, Adam Smith, he was a professor of moral theology, not of economics. Economics didn't exist. He was a professor of moral theology. He was a professor of the big things and why they mattered in the cosmos, at least in the theological cosmos. That's what we've gotten away from. You know, I taught at the university for a long time, and the relativism, the lack of a sense of moral grounding. We talked about, am I a social conservative, a social liberal? Look, I have very complicated views. But my private religious faith is the most important thing in my life. It's everything I do has to do with that. Now, that's not what I'm talking about here today, but that's really important. Lucky me. I had too many students who came in without a moral grounding. You don't need my religious faith to get a moral grounding. You need people who talk about morals, who talk about brotherhood. That's what we need. And then if we do that, then money and finance and economics can be layered on top of that because it can be used as a tool for good by everybody. But we have to start in the right place. If we don't start in the right place, we're not going to end up in the right destination. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the festival.